really the backbone of this play is the power of imagination and storytelling in any circumstances. And so I want to ask the creative team what it was like to develop this sense of fantasy versus reality in this world. I think that division was a lot of fun across the board. And there was such an array, everything from, small whimsical touches of costume pieces. Like something that struck me tonight was how Quixote just had to turn on his vest to become Quixote. So we have something as small and precise as that to such a rich lighting design to create different worlds. So I think the balance of that is really interesting. So does anyone want to start off and talking about how we came to talk about those things, or some of the collaboration for fantasy versus reality? Oh, yep, perfect.
Hi, I really, the tenderness of a bucket and a broom, the tenderness of a bucket and a broom to become a horse, and also the sense of the violence, to have to face that today and do it with a graceful sense of hope for that kind of behavior will stop, to make it fantasy and reality, and then a new world, to make this play new so that we can see from a different filter things like violence and love, and as Preston said in his notes, faith.
Is there anyone else first things that I keep looking over at orchestra because I think about the balance? Yeah, absolutely.
I'll say one thing. In regards to the set design and the lighting design, one thing is trying to work with Joe, the set designer, to create a world that these actors can play in, and that they can live in, and that can breathe. And part of the thing, which was something that we had to work on collaborating together, was how we are to remember that we're still in a prison cell, but how when we bring and break out that story when we were out of that prison cell and back into Don Quixote's head, and then back into the prison cell. So you might have seen there's a lot of back and forth in the lighting design. We kept going up and down and up and down. And prison cell, warm and cool, and the inn and the musical number. So there's a lot of that, and trying to make sure that we deliberately knew, so that you guys knew when we were back into reality and when we were back into that imaginary world.
One of the first things that Preston said when we started the rehearsal process, which I sort of took and ran with, was he wanted the audience, when you walked in at the start of the show, to not know you were coming to see a musical, or maybe you made a mistake and you thought you were coming to see a musical, but you couldn't hear the orchestra, you couldn't see them, you were just watching these people in prison. And so that was really cool to figure out, well then, what is the orchestra, what is the music? It only exists in Cervantes's imagination. So it was really cool to work with these guys and be like, I might be the only music director in the history of America to tell the lighting designer to turn our lights out in the back. Because I was like, no, I want us to go away so that when we go to the prison, we're not here. We just exist when he invites us to be here. And then Chris, as you heard, is amazing and did such a good job at creating sound that was theatrical when it needs to be theatrical, but then real when it doesn't. I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I think all good musical theater kind of steps very effortlessly into a heightened kind of state of fantasy or heightened reality. And the cool thing about this show is that there's sort of almost a third layer or intermediate step where they, with the storytelling within the world, not necessarily a musical number, but there is still this sense of play and imagination happening. And so for me, it was a great gift to not only have to work on differentiating between just the moments of speech versus song, as you might typically do in a more simple musical, but this has this, like I'm saying, this great playful world that then bubbles into song at times. And so it was really fun playing along with these shifts, and I think we talked a lot about what those shifts would be. Would they be sort of just sinking into the states, or are they kind of more harsh, shocking, juxtaposing things where we snap out of something into snapping back to the prison instead of allowing the audience breath to kind of ease back into it was something that came up a lot. And so I think a lot of work went into thinking about making those transitions at times kind of effortless and natural, and then other times really kind of making something of the shifts.
And I think what's fun for the audience that you don't get to see, or that's something that even continues to develop over previews, is how even the timing of how quickly things happen changes. We had a collaboration on when a lighting cue was called later because the orchestra sort of ushered it in. And so, yeah, I think the division of the world there's just a lot that goes into how we develop that. Yeah, perfect.
We're talking about, certainly collaboration, creating fantasy, and for my role as costume designer, trying to really listen and explore what Preston is saying he wants for as far as the reality of the characters, where are they, who are they individually, but also as they're working out different scenes and trying to solve challenges, in particular with the vest, that came from the actor. So we knew he had the vest, but it was his idea, what if that just turns around and becomes the armor? Because we were looking at all these different ways that we could give him armor. Is it a protective vest that you'd wear for paintball, kind of in the same world as the helmet? So those were interesting things that came out of it for me. And also the plastic bowl for the, the golden helmet of Membrino. What would they have, that would look like that? So working with props on that was a great fun experiment and challenge. Talk about projections.
For videos, the biggest transition for us was as soon as we get to the story, we start out in this world of static and of security cameras, and then as soon as we transition to the story is where we get a more graphic, illustrational style, and starting to add color. And then when we start to blur the lines between is this story or is this back in the prison, is when we kind of just combine those two ideas to either include static on the graphic design or to just switch to security with some color.
Perfect. So something that was a challenge that came up for everyone, or as Preston likes to say, a problem-tunity, was that in this production, nearly every character in the show is on stage the entire time, which presents challenges across the board. So I would just love to hear about, or again, not challenge, problem-tunity. How did you as the creative team come up against that and really make that work for the design and for you? Do you want to start again, Denise, and talk about? Sure. Perfect.
I had the joy of having the first rehearsal to set the environment of the prison. And it was dauntingly, delightfully wonderful to see the minds of these actors go into the behavior as if they had to live in a detention system. And they could let their minds wander to see how would their behavior change on the inside. Who did they hate? Who did they love? Who did they meet where they actually get comfort? Well, all the things that go on in one's embodied mindfulness that didn't really have a lot to do at that time with singing a song. It really had to do with them, meeting them in those given circumstances. And I think that was the beginning of looking at the behavior that comes out of the human condition when you meet some of these obstacles, when you meet your own dreams, when you don't have the world that you want, or be with the love that you needed. So a lot of this, especially working with Preston, is a trust in the faith that you're not going to have the show blocked the first week, have the songs perfectly, and know exactly where you are in space and what every prop is. It's always an unfolding discovery, and it's an unfolding faith in instincts and truth. And it lets art serve us, serve you guys, the audience, to have to meet yourself in a dark theater. And I guess for me it was, tonight I wondered, what are people's prisons? Maybe are they building that behavior that takes you in your own little prison. And then all of a sudden we have a fantasy of a yellow bowl on our head, thinking of something sacred in our life that's meaningful. Or like tonight, and I'm finished up in a minute, but I've never seen the picture. The woman at the beginning of the show that stars the ooh, it's like it's a picture picture that she has. It's very private, but she's looking at a picture of a little boy, and so that's been what it was for me, to find behavior in movement, behavior in expression, not the perfect dance step.
Excellent. Other major challenges of having the actors on stage here for deeper focus, yeah.
One thing I'll say about that is that the idea of having them always on the stage, it gave a believability to it, because in the set design and designing this kind of, that confrontation of wires in this confined space, if the actors were constantly leaving and going, we wouldn't quite believe that they're in a prison. So the fact that they're always there, and in terms of lighting, there was always something to look at. For me, it was a blessing, because sometimes blackouts that we see in shows kind of take you out of the picture, and then we're constantly bringing a light as someone comes in and out and in and out. So the idea that there was always some kind of light source on, and it was kind of moving around the stage, I'm sort of telling you guys where to look and at what point to look there. So there's always something going on, and the idea with these large fences and things like that was sort of to envelop the space. Even the thing you see above us, the header unit, that's actually designed for the show, it's not part of the theater. And it was all of that kind of give us the entire volume of that space. So I appreciated that the actors were on stage the whole time for lighting.
One of the cool things that when we were casting and then in rehearsal was finding at least one actor who played an instrument, because we really wanted to be able to leave, you know, that if they're going to be on stage the whole time, they're learning the show and they're learning all the music and the things from Cervantes as he tells the story. And so it was really cool to fold in the actors who played, who never leave the stage, to be able to, there at the end. What I love about our production is that, you know, what's written is that the orchestra plays him out from the very beginning, is what's in the score. And then Preston and I were like, well, what happens if the guy who's been playing the whole time, he learned that song, The Impossible Dream, and he starts to play it? And then what if she starts to sing it, and then what if the orchestra, they then bring the fantasy back alive as he's leaving? And so that's a really fantastic, I think, moment that's unique to our production that was cool, that came about from the idea of them being on stage the whole time and having learned the show. So that was something cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely an added challenge of making sure that focus goes to the right person. For me, you know, you might typically, if there was a duet happening, there would only be those two people on stage. And so for me, I did feel an added kind of responsibility to ensure that the voices in the songs were really drawing us in. But I think luckily, you know, with the amazing staging and setting that we have and the way the cast is pulling it off, I feel like it's kind of happened quite naturally that way. And then it gives us the opportunity to have an amazing moment like that, where we have you know, a real guitarist on stage doing a very simple, natural introduction to the song, and then we can build it up and swell it into the, you know, big ensemble finale that it is. So I think ultimately it really paid off, despite the challenge that it gave us.
I would say that there is a challenge with that many people. This isn't a big stage. And when we did South Pacific, people said, how are you going to fit all those people on the stage? This is a slightly smaller cast than South Pacific, but that's a lot of people on this stage. It doesn't leave a lot of room, and our rehearsal hall is much smaller than this theater. You may have walked by it on the third and fourth hallway and peeked in at some point. It's a room with no windows and a low ceiling, and when you put 14, 15 loud actors and a whole bunch of other people who are working on the show inside that rehearsal hall for 3.5 weeks, I thought I was going to take people's guitars and hit them over the head a couple of times, because, you know, everyone wants to play it when they're on a break. But there was an absolute joy to it too, because everyone was there all the time, and everyone was sort of deeply collaborative in the creation of the story. And they, everyone realizes that they have multiple roles to play. But I love this play. I love Man of La Mancha. And one of the things that I feel when I see it elsewhere is that you forget the prisoners. You go home and you remember Aldonza and Sancho and all those people, but you forget that they were in a jail, that they were prisoners who were telling the story. And I really loved because they couldn't escape, because they were here, because they were watching it with you. Today we made the discovery in rehearsal, because Sabina was our first audience, that all of you were prisoners too. And so they have the freedom to look at you, to see you, which you don't have if you're doing, a William Inge play, and you're like, I'm in the bus stop, and there's nobody here but me. That they become an audience like you, and I can't control your responses, but I can control theirs. So if I wanted to laugh or applause at something, they could do it.
I'm going to open up for just a few questions, but I do want to, something that Preston said. It was so vital that we get in the space as quickly as possible because of how we interacted with it. And so I'd love to hear, first of all, what is a director of production? And how did we get in here earlier than other productions?
Both of those are really hard questions. Director of production is, I'm in the supervisor for the whole production department, so underneath me is the technical director and the props master and the scenic artist and the master electrician. So every department has its own head, and I'm the one that tries to keep the communication through the whole department. So I take the information from the designers, their kind of design that they give us, and then I give it to the department heads, and then we make it happen. So that's in a nutshell what I do. But getting into the space early, we pushed really hard to load it in, which is bringing all of the scenery pieces over from our production shop, which is over near the convention center. And we realized that this space was actually really important to get in here early because the rehearsal hall is so small. Also, you can't really put scaffolding inside of our rehearsal hall, so having that whole backstage area was really important. So we tried to get in here as early as we could. I think you guys got in here Wednesday a week ago, 2 weeks ago, so that they had some time before all of our designers got in here so they could do some spacing and figure out where this chair is located, where, how to get onto the scaffolding, and the orchestra could also see where they're going to be.
Yeah. It was like almost a week earlier than any of our other productions, and I just wanted to congratulate you on that, and because it's so important, particularly on this production. Thank you. So I want to open the floor now just for a few quick questions before we wrap up. Do you have any questions for our director or any of our other designers? Yes, in the back.
There's a really hard scene and a really important scene when the muleteers break Aldonza. And I'm really curious about how, given the way our society is right now and all the stuff about women and men and all that stuff, how you all approached presenting that scene.
I was troubled when I went back to think about doing this play. That scene, there's another scene that we're not doing, actually, and it's the Gypsies and Moors dance, which is filled with really ugly racial stereotypes, which I'm sure in 1965 seemed all right, innocuous on Broadway, but are frequently removed from the production today. This, however, is not removable. It's essential. And I think one of the things that allowed me to have the courage to do it is that I think it's essential. It isn't, what's done to her isn't done to help Don Quixote. It doesn't help him. It helps her. Not that that's a horrible, I don't mean to say helps her. But what's done to her changes who she is. How she responds to it changes who she is. She finds agency in the aftermath of that. And so when we sat down with the cast to begin the work, we talked about our views on this. It is, as written, there's a lot of like ripping of skirts and a whole lot of violence. I hated the fact that it's sort of done like a ballet originally, and I desperately wanted to close off the final acts of it, to actually put those screens up around it and implicate the muleteers as an audience peering at this degradation of a human being, and they're participating in it. We worked very hard to create a brave space, which is the idea that a rehearsal hall should be a space where we're going to take risks and we're going to fail, but with the recognition that it is a safe space for that to happen. I worked so closely with Denise, and I'll hand the mic to Denise in a second to talk about this as well, to make sure that we saw her resistance, we saw the evil that was done to her, and ultimately then, in the original, it's written that Fermina, who is the character who sings the last few lines there, that Fermina actually joins in. She holds her down. And we wanted to build a support system of the women on the stage to stop this action in the story, to as an audience to say, we don't want this to happen. So it's constructed with thought and in an attempt to really try to tell that story in a way that speaks to who we are today.
Yeah, I would like to restate the importance of the ending of a woman coming in and saying stop, and then other women coming in to help her. I just was very pleased that it took that direction here, because it was disturbing to think of having to do it. I've done it before, and it was not collaborative that way, but also certain issues had not been so present in 2019. When I did it before, it was 2009, I think. And so we were in a different place. So I hope it communicated to the audience a sensitivity, the no, and the women helping. And if you watch some of the men, they're making some choices behaviorally. And they have to follow the script. They have to be here. But it's not that different than men in Hollywood who have a dear friend supposedly be caught. They still have to respond and decide whether they're going to make a stand, if they're going to speak, and if they're going to stop it. So hopefully our choices will move that forward.
And it was very important for me as well that the awareness of the difference between the prisoner performer and the role performed was both, I think, in the act, somewhat kind of a thin division, but at the end of it, an awareness and a calling to account for their participation, the shame of that moment when Fermina says stop.
Excellent question. We have time for one more before we have to wrap things up. Yes.
I thought it was great that you put the book by Cervantes up on the tables so you could see all those 47 chapters and the brilliance of making a wonderful musical with this theme of hope and all those pretty songs. But what you bring in yourself to this play, the sound effect, the Spanish Inquisition, and what's going on outside. And I came to this play tonight reading some horrible news that happened in our state. I don't even know if you know about it or not yet. But 2 students at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, were killed right before this play started and a bunch of them were hurt, and it was a shooting on a campus in our state. And I kept thinking, when we heard the sounds, and I'm thinking about our society, and how the Spanish Inquisition was so awful, and how all these shootings on college campuses are so awful in our time. It's what I brought to this play. My heart was hurting the whole time, and every time I heard those sounds, it made me think of our world right now. But it was a beautiful play, and I loved it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, for technically talking. Have a safe ride home. Thank you.
Thank you.